Well, it's great to be here in London. Special thanks to the Africa Research Institute. I had the chance to visit Sheffield yesterday, where there's incredible work being done in the Development Studies Association on urban issues, and it seems like there's a lot of interesting things being done here. So it's great to be able to present some of my research and some of my ideas with you all, and thanks for coming out. So as has already been mentioned, this project is a collaboration with Mohammed Al-Wal, who's a research officer at the Center for Democratic Development in Ghana, and he's an expert on democracy and governance as well as a resident of Accra, and I am excited to share some of this work. So the goal of the presentation is to discuss something really important in Africa today, that of urbanization. But in doing so, I hope to shed light on a part of the story that's not often told, and that is the story of urbanization from the actual urban communities, and especially the poor urban communities themselves. I'll share some of my insights from my field work, and in the end, hope to provide some answers to the question, who really governs urban Ghana? So, as many of you know, Africa is facing a significant demographic challenge. The majority of its residents are moving to cities. Prominent scholars have called this an urban revolution. The continent is largely shifting from a largely rural continent to an urban one. And in Ghana, this process is well on its way. The population in urban centers has grown from 4 to 14 million people. And all of these challenges place significant pressure on cities to provide houses, employment, and resources in cities that are already kind of stressed to begin with. And one of the key initiatives of the new Sustainable Development Goal is to view cities as an opportunity for development rather than just a crisis. So Dr. Joan Close, who's the executive director of UN Habitat, recently said that we need to shift the view of thinking of cities as containers of problems, but rather to think of them as accelerators of development. But I want to argue that sustainable development is a political struggle. So, for example, the struggle for basic urban services, things as simple as clean sewers and sanitation, is a central part of the multi-party politics and sustainable development across the continent. So here in South Africa, you see township dwellers take to the street to demand better sanitation. Sanitation is dignity. In Kibera, in Kenya, residents deal with the problem of flying toilets, little baggies thrown into nearby ravines. And in Ghana, local leaders struggle to control public toilets, and in particular the contracts in order to manage these public toilets. And these demands have been so intense that they are called toilet wars in local discourse. So in the course of development process, there are winners and losers. Yet, most studies of urbanization in Africa fail to consider what is going on in the lives of urban dwellers, particularly in the poorest of neighborhoods. So in 2011 and 2012, I spent 1 year conducting field research in 3 particular neighborhoods, and each day I would go to these areas and I would eat breakfast and lunch, oftentimes dinner with community leaders. I'd attend community meetings. I spent a lot of time in the political party offices of both the NDC and the MPP party, as well as in private offices of politicians to kind of understand what was going on. And a lot of this was taking place in the lead up to the 2012 presidential election. So I really gained some interesting insights into how multi-party politics is played before an election. And in doing so, I think this allowed me to see how these communities were governed from below. And in particularly what was motivating residents' behavior, what incentivized leaders to do what they were doing, but also what constraints they faced in their daily lives and in their, their goals as leaders, their goals as politicians, and these sorts of things. So I'm now going to discuss with you Old Fadama, which is locally often termed as Sodom and Gomorrah in Accra. It happens to be Accra's largest squatter settlement, and it sits right in the center of the city. So every day I would sit just about here to the left of this sewer. And what do you notice about this sewer?
Open.
Okay, it's open. So what does that open sewer then allow for?
Disease.
Okay, so there's diseases. They're choked, is what they call it in Ghana. They're full, right? So people throw their garbage in the sewer. They're not emptied, and it can lead to certain cholera outbreaks as well as flooding, as you see in the picture here. Now we can travel across the city to a neighborhood in Ashima. And a few weeks later, I noticed something very different, that the sewers were cleaned and maintained. Although they're just informally operated sewers, every morning, a kayabola, which is a local trash collector, would sweep out the sewer and place piles of trash next to the sewer. Later in the day, a kayabola would come by and bring the trash to a nearby landfill. Now, the differences between these neighborhoods, they kind of interested me and surprised me. Both are informal settlements with dense shacks for housing, infrastructure constructed by the community, diverse populations, lots of poor people, high levels of ethnic diversity, all of these things that were quite similar. Yet in Ashima, the community was able to informally organize to keep its sewers clean, while in the previous neighborhood, Old Fadama, they could not. And in many ways, cleaning sewers represents a classic collective action problem. All members would benefit from clean sewers. But cleaning the sewers has a cost, and it is unlikely for any one person to attempt to clean the sewers by him or herself. Further, ordinary residents will attempt a free ride or benefit from the sewers with clean sewers without participating in the cleanup. Therefore, the optimal outcome is to share the cost of cleaning the sewers among all residents in the slum. So what I tried to do in this research is set off to try to figure out why some of these slums could overcome this collective action problem while others were unable to do so. So as I did more field work, I continued to go to these communities on a daily basis, but I also combined this with survey research. I found that these neighborhood level differences really did extend across the entire city, and country for that matter. And my goal was to discover patterns across the different slums, which only could be possible by comparing local politics across these different neighborhoods. And I found that the challenge of cleaning sewers was part of a larger institutional environment of how local communities interacted with formal political actors. And what I found was that two factors were most important: community leadership and the social engagement between residents and leaders. And these variables interact with party politics in fascinating ways. So as you can see in this map, there are different slum neighborhoods and informal settlements in the community, and I found that they were governed in very different ways depending on how the community was settled. So I noticed that populations in each of these slums where I worked were quite different. They came to the city in very different ways and at very different times. And what we do in this paper, we argue a little bit that when and how a slum was settled shapes whether leaders are accountable to their people and whether residents from ethnic groups socially engage with one another. And what that means is whether neighbors eat together, celebrate holidays together, grieve family deaths together, anything that goes on in the context of daily life. So in some communities, the original inhabitants illegally occupied land, and residents constantly worry about forced evictions. Leaders and politicians are able to exploit this insecurity, and what this contributes to is a type of social engagement where people interact with members of their own ethnic group and are almost afraid of different power dynamics with people in different groups. Whereas In other communities, people claim ancestral rights to the city. They claim that they are indigenous to this city, and they often take pride in this status and seek to keep outsiders from coming into the city. They are worried that people coming in are going to take over control of their city. And they develop a strong sense of ethnic nationalism, and social interactions represent these strong indigenous identities. Now, in purchase settlements, what I call them, early settlers legitimately bought land from customary authorities. Residents engage in local politics by attending public forums and making demands for more public goods, and leaders are expected to provide them all to residents. And what you notice over the course of these settling over time, residents begin to eat, visit, engage with people from many different groups. And now in formal party politics, they're actually in the same parties, working with the same people, doing all the sorts of campaign events together. So what we argue is that these settlement patterns shape the different way that resources are distributed, as well as how multi-party politics is played. And in communities like Ashima, where they had the clean sewers, the leaders are more accountable and there are more cross-ethnic ties, enabling people to come together and keep their sewers clean. So who really governs urban Ghana? Well, there's several possibilities. The international community, through agencies like the World Bank, of course, funds policies and projects and tries to create incentives to govern the city in a just and equitable manner. But in reality, this is just a small portion of what shapes governance in the city, yet strangely makes up a huge portion of the scholarship and a huge portion of the media attention. Now, more importantly, the Ghanaian state has its stake in urban governance. But as my colleague Mohammed Awal's research really shows, Ghana relies on multi-level governance, and its decentralized administrative bodies are under-resourced and lack real power. So what this means is that too much power is placed in the presidency and at the expense of democratic authority at the local level. So for cities, what this means is that mayors are appointed by the government, which they're often appointed as political figureheads, and they're not truly democratic representatives of the people. Now, the view from within the city also suggests that neighborhood politics matter a great deal. Chiefs, pastors, residents, landlords, and other opinion leaders is a term that's often used at the local level in Ghana, play an important role in shaping access to land, housing, jobs, and other opportunities. It's also important to note that these actors form informal networks with political parties as well as with government workers. So uncovering these hidden networks of power is a central part of what we try to do in the publication that we released today. So let's take a look at this picture for a moment. Does anyone know who this is?
President.
It's the president, President John Mahama. Does anyone know who the gentleman right behind him?
That's the mayor.
That's the mayor, Alfred van der Poel. And this is an example of a communal labor exercise, which has a long history in Ghana. And leaders are expected to bring their communities together and organize the youth and clean up their cities and towns and villages. And it was popularized during the time of Jerry John Rawlings, and often politicized over time in different ways. But what you see is that governing the city is a collective endeavor between politicians, leaders, and the people. And this dates back historically, during the colonial period and all the way through post-colonial Ghana. Well, I don't have time to discuss everything in the publication. I do want to highlight some of the few sections that are included. In the section on the political machine, we outline how the MPP and the NDC, which are Ghana's two largest parties, establish patron-client relationships with community leaders and members in order to win elections. Residents are concerned with meals, jobs, and rent payments, and all of these affect how they vote and who they support in elections. But it's also important to note that these aren't all just about elections. everyday, normal people in their everyday lives rely on these leaders to solve daily problems and daily challenges. And I think that's a part that's often underemphasized if we just look at it as a straight political machine to win elections. Now, politicians must rely on these relationships as well as informal norms of religion, parenthood, and tradition. And we discuss this in How to Win at Politics. So you see leaders going and giving church services. And they do so because they believe in Christianity and it's a big part of their faith. They also do so to be given some sort of spiritual support. And they wear, and all of these kind of come up during campaign times and throughout daily life. Now, these simply become the rules of the game. And relationships between representatives and their constituents are largely based on respect, rather than just an implicit threat of removal or sanctioning them out of office. So, for example, in Akan, which is Ghana's most widely spoken language, the word for democracy is kabi ma menkabi, which translates to I speak and then you speak. For many Ghanaians, democracy is a process of political expression between equals as well as with people in power. So in many ways, this explains why people want the cell phone number for their leaders in their phone. They want to be able to go over to their leader's house at 4 o'clock in the morning and express their grievances and have a discussion that's based on dignity, based on respect, and based on deliberation. It ensures that those who are affected by decisions are then included in the decision-making process. Finally, in the section on landlords and housing, we discussed the 3 different settlement patterns, which I went through quickly, but I'm happy to talk about in the question and answer. So what does this actually look like in practice? So if we approach the politics of development like we outline in this paper, it forces us to think about the hidden networks that govern slums. So to do so, we must expand what we think of is political. So in my work, I treated events that happened in daily life as my study site. For example, one of the biggest days of the year was the Champions League final. And when I was there, it was between Chelsea and Bayern Munich. There were very few Bayern Munich fans. The few Bayern Munich fans were supporters of Manchester United who really did not want to see Chelsea win. So I used the viewing as a match as a lens into the power dynamics of the slum. So 3 leaders in particular stood out. Al-Haji, chief and boss, I call them in the paper. They were notable big men in the slum, and they were instrumental in making sure that the game was shown to area youth. So during that day, there was a big storm, and there was no electricity in the community. Oftentimes, electricity is turned off by the authorities because they're worried that there's actually going to be people are going to get hurt when there's a big slum, as you saw with the flooding. So there was no electricity in the neighborhood, so therefore these leaders had to be problem solvers. Everyone in the community relied on these sorts of leaders to come up with a problem so that they could watch the game. Now, Chief had a generator and paid an errand boy to go get gas for the generator. And he controlled an area right in front of this local party office to the left, which was in front of a big mosque, so it gave him a lot of power. And he also was able to kind of sell land in the surrounding area, informally, of course, because he didn't have any sort of tenure rights to the land, but he could sell this land informally to people of his social network, mostly people of his ethnic network. But he was very entrepreneurial, and people really relied on him to solve these problems. So at the course of the game, everyone watched right under his little space, his hangout space, and people were happy to watch. Now, another leader, Al-Haji, is important because he is one of the few leaders in the neighborhood with a government job. In his role, he is able to link people up to important people in the government. This enabled his friends to get jobs and secure contracts. So he even helped Boss, the third gentleman I'll talk about, get a contract from the city to clean sewers in a neighborhood with area youth. He hopes to use the power that he accumulated to run for political office, so the power that he got by living here, working in government, but to run for office back home in the northern region, which is where he's from. Now, Boss, our third gentleman leader, is a controversial figure who is feared by many in the community, but he's also trusted by a select group. He was one of the first settlers in Old Fadama, and he established links to the party at a very early age. He's a prominent scrap dealer and well-known macho man, is what they call it in the name for the NDC. At one point, he was kicked out of the country during the MPP time, but he was able to come back. And now he lives a nice life in Old Fadama as well as other places. And he purchased jollof rice for many of the area youth at this time and acted kind of as a parental role during the game. Now, these three men played an important role in governing Old Fadama, but it's important to note that they were only accountable to a small group of people. Not all 80,000 people who govern this slum. By the end of the game, residents were ecstatic. Chelsea won. We praise God, we praise God. They all cheered at the end. And it was quite a fun night of experience, this joyous occasion. So what does any of this tell us about sewers and sustainable development? Well, first, I think it's important that we shift the discourse from an urban crisis to a political opportunity. And what I mean by this is that slums offer opportunities for community leaders to attract a following and engage in formal party politics. I mean, people come to the city. Many of these people are from marginalized communities up in the north, and it's their closest way to get to the state and get really, power. And they're relied on for votes. So they have a really important stake in Ghana's democracy. But this does not necessarily mean that they'll necessarily serve the public interest. It offers politicians a huge vote bank. It offers community leaders the chance to be party brokers. And it offers people the chance to be a part of Ghana's democratic practice. So even cleaning sewers, as I kind of mentioned throughout, is political. Second, Ghanaian city dwellers need to have incentives to follow policy prescriptions and to play by the official rules. So currently, politicians like Chief, Boss, Alhaji, many others across my experience, they really do benefit from the status quo. Instead, registering land and businesses need to be made profitable for people like them. So if we believe in certain formalization procedures, the people who have most at stake need to have the incentive to join that formal process. So providing public goods and services to newcomers needs to help these people, but it also has to help politicians win elections, because politicians rely on these many different constituencies in order to win elections, and that's how they make decisions about development, contract provision, etc. And third is that the grassroots political economy and informal networks shape prospects for sustainable development. So when slum upgrading and infrastructure developments are prioritized without considering local conditions, they distort the community governance that is already taking place, as well as cause resentment and inequality. So administrative or technical solutions that organizations such as World Bank, UN Habitat, and other international NGOs advocate, in my experience, I found that many of them were incomplete at best, and in the worst cases, they fueled inequality in these cases and resentment amongst different groups. Now, I did find some potential possibilities on how to move forward. So neighborhoods with accountable leadership and cross-ethnic social engagement are most likely to succeed, and development priorities should consider ways to improve these types of conditions and build on these types of things. So public governance forums, land dispute initiatives, and legal recognition of neighborhoods, I found, were a good place on which to build. So planning and finance are not the foremost problems in these communities. Poorly understood politics is.